For 3 months, I poured my soul into designing the $8 million project proposal, the one everyone said was too ambitious. I refined every detail, fixed the logistics, and even coached the presentation team. But when the big day arrived, the meeting that could define the company's future, I wasn't even invited. I watched from my desk as they walked into that glass-walled room, proudly holding my work. I almost walked out in silence, until 10 minutes in, the CEO stopped mid-sentence and asked, "Wait, where's the real architect?" That moment changed everything. From the day I joined Allerton Systems as a senior product engineer, I knew I wasn't just another hire. I'd been headhunted for months after my software architecture won a Tech Innovation Award, and Allerton had pitched themselves as a forward-thinking company that wanted to invest in real visionaries. So when they asked me to lead the product roadmap for their next-generation enterprise management suite, a project that eventually got projected at over $8 million in revenue, I dove in headfirst. I sketched, designed, documented, and reimagined nearly every technical aspect of the platform. My fingerprints were on everything: the user flow, the database logic, the performance specs, even the pitch deck mock-ups the sales team requested just in case. I pulled late nights, brought in external experts for code reviews, and got feedback from beta testers myself, because I didn't want this to just succeed. I wanted it to be the standard. For the first year, everything went how you'd expect: slow progress, occasional roadblocks, but steady wins. My direct manager, Brad, seemed supportive at first, though I noticed he had a habit of taking credit during leadership meetings. I'd get pinged afterward by junior engineers who overheard him presenting my performance metrics as his team's milestones. But I didn't speak up. Not yet. I figured maybe that's how management works: everyone rises by absorbing the glow of others. Still, I kept everything documented: design logs, build notes, decision threads. My entire pipeline was organized, version-controlled, and time-stamped. Then, about 14 months into the project, a shift began. Quiet at first. I noticed I was no longer being added to the Monday planning calls. Brad told me they'd been streamlined to leadership only. Fine. Then the dev review sessions, which I usually chaired, were led by one of Brad's hand-picked tech leads. I chalked it up to scaling. Maybe we were growing, and roles had to adapt. But what I couldn't ignore was when our beta results came back with glowing feedback, and the internal newsletter attributed project architecture and strategic design to Brad and his core innovation group. My name wasn't even in the footnotes. I confronted Brad casually. "Hey, I saw the internal email. The architecture credit, was that a mistake, or?" He laughed. "Don't worry about those write-ups, Sarah. You know how marketing likes to spin things." "Sure. Spin." I decided to brush it off, for the time being. But the cracks were widening. 2 weeks later, our company was preparing for the biggest meeting in its history. A pitch to a massive logistics conglomerate that could license our new platform in a multi-year deal. I was indirectly involved, asked to finalize the interface documentation and tighten the specs. But I wasn't invited to the client prep sessions, or the demo dry runs, or the strategy briefings. Something felt deeply wrong. I checked my calendar obsessively, thinking maybe I missed an invite. Nothing. Then, on the morning of the big pitch, I realized the entire leadership team was in the conference room by 8:30 a.m. The glass walls made it impossible to miss. Brad was up there with 2 other execs, including our head of business development, presenting the deck I had personally designed, the interface models, the system diagram, even the client Q&A script I had ghostwritten at Brad's request just to help him think through talking points. And I was outside, watching. It was humiliating. Later that day, one of the interns in product quietly forwarded me a copy of the internal deck. "I figured you should see what they're using. Your name isn't in here." It wasn't just omitted, it had been replaced. Slides that were once labeled Architectural Overview, Sarah A., were now simply labeled Design Core, Brad and Team. That night, I went home and stared at my screen for hours. I wasn't angry yet, I was calculating. I reopened my logs, every single branch of the Git repository. I compiled side-by-side screenshots of slide iterations, versions that showed my initials in the change history. My presentation scripts. My system flow models. I even had chat logs where Brad had thanked me for making his life easy by pre-answering client concerns in the tech documentation. It wasn't just a hunch now. It was theft. Still, I didn't act yet. I needed one more moment of clarity, something undeniable. And it came. The day after the pitch, an announcement was made company-wide: we've secured a provisional agreement for the enterprise licensing deal pending final negotiations. Massive thanks to Brad, Angela, and Leon for leading the charge. Attached was a photo, Brad shaking hands with the CEO of the logistics firm. That's when I got a message from someone unexpected, a junior associate on the client's technical procurement team. The message read, "Hey Sarah, just wanted to say thanks again. Your documentation made our internal review process so smooth. Can we schedule a follow-up to talk more about back-end extensibility?" That stopped me cold. They thought I was still involved. I asked casually, "Were you able to discuss the platform architecture with Brad?" His reply, "Brad? He just referred us to a PDF. We assumed you'd lead tech clarifications later." I smiled bitterly. Because now, I had proof that not only had Brad cut me out, but the client still saw me as the real point of contact. And they had no idea I hadn't even been invited to the table. It was time to act. The following week was quiet. Too quiet. Inside, I knew that the real battle was just beginning, but outwardly, I acted like everything was normal. I joined team calls, responded to bug fix requests, and continued iterating on documentation that no one was even bothering to review anymore. It was clear I'd been sidelined, but I wasn't going to walk away. Not without setting the record straight. Instead of reacting emotionally, I went full forensic. Every email, every message, every design asset, I compiled a massive archive of my contributions. The original project roadmap had been created in my Notion workspace. The architectural diagrams were built using my personal Lucidchart account. Even the alpha testing results had my comments layered across the margins, with direct references to code snippets I had written. There was no ambiguity, I hadn't just helped build this product. I was the architect. But I needed more than just evidence, I needed leverage. So I started contacting people. Quietly. First, I reached out to a colleague named Mina in finance. She was sharp, discreet, and had once confided that Brad made her uncomfortable because of how he twisted forecasts to match whatever narrative leadership wanted to hear. I simply asked her, "Have you seen the pitch deck used in the $8 million client meeting?" She hadn't. She requested it and later messaged me with a single line, "You're not listed anywhere. It's like you don't exist." Next, I pinged a contact on the board's technical advisory group. This was riskier. But I framed my question carefully, more like curiosity than concern. "Hey, just wondering if you've reviewed the technical background provided in the logistics deal? Would love your thoughts." A few days later, he responded, "Honestly, it looked thin. Mostly marketing slides. Didn't feel like it came from engineering." Exactly what I needed to hear. In parallel, I began preparing an anonymous package for the board's audit committee. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I believed in the integrity of the company I'd worked so hard for. If the product succeeded based on lies, the foundation would crumble eventually. And I refused to let my name get buried with it. Still, there was one person I hadn't reached out to yet, the CEO himself. Allerton's CEO, Mark Travers, wasn't known for being accessible. He was charismatic, well-liked by investors, but incredibly busy and often detached from the day-to-day operations. Most communication filtered through executive layers. But I remembered something he said during an early town hall: "If you ever think your voice is being suppressed, I want to hear it directly." It was time to test that. I composed a carefully worded email. Not angry. Not accusatory. Just factual and respectful. Subject: clarification on my role in enterprise platform architecture. Hi Mark. I hope this message finds you well. I wanted to clarify some potential confusion regarding the architecture and engineering direction of our new enterprise platform, particularly as it relates to the recent logistics licensing deal. Over the past 18 months, I led the design, build, and deployment of our product's full-stack architecture, including documentation that the client referenced during their review process. However, I've recently noticed that my involvement has been omitted from internal presentations and client-facing material. I'm attaching a short summary of my contributions, with supporting links, for transparency. I'm not seeking credit for vanity's sake, but clarity, especially when it comes to client communication and future product support. Thanks for taking the time. Best regards. Sarah Allen. I didn't expect a reply immediately, but to my surprise, I received one within 12 hours. Reply from Mark Travers. Sarah, thank you for flagging this. I'm reviewing your notes tonight. Let's catch up Monday. Please hold off on any further action until we speak. Mark. That one email changed everything. Suddenly, I noticed my name resurfacing in Slack channels I hadn't been tagged in for weeks. Team leads were suddenly checking in on specs I'd already submitted. One even apologized for the confusion during the deck handoff, as if it were just an honest mix-up. But the biggest shift came the following Monday. I walked into the 9 a.m. weekly leadership sync, normally reserved for directors and above, but this time, I was specifically invited. When I entered the room, Brad was already seated at the far end, smiling tightly. He didn't look surprised to see me, more like he had prepared a defense. Mark entered late, holding a printout. He didn't say much at first, just shuffled to the head of the table and placed my email on the desk. Then, he asked the question that made the entire room go still. Where's the real architect? Everyone turned toward Brad. Brad cleared his throat. Well, the deck we used was a collaborative summary. Sarah contributed to early phases, but the final client version. Mark cut him off. The client contacted me directly, asking why the person who designed the architecture wasn't part of the meeting. And that's not a minor concern. That's a problem. Silence. I've reviewed Sarah's documentation. There's no doubt she led the build. Frankly, I'm surprised at how comprehensive her record-keeping was compared to what I've seen from this group. He paused. So again, how did her name get removed from the client pitch? Brad stammered, offering some excuse about streamlining, branding, and time constraints. But it was clear the air had shifted. Mark wasn't buying it. And neither was anyone else. The meeting ended with Mark stating plainly, "We'll be doing a full internal review. For now, Sarah, reintegrate with the client immediately. They're asking technical questions, and you're the only one who can answer them." I nodded, but inside, I was burning. I had been erased, and then, when the client demanded answers, suddenly I was important again? No. It wasn't enough to be included again. The truth had to come out. I returned to my desk after that leadership meeting, stunned by the whiplash of attention. 1 week ago, I was invisible. Now, not only had the CEO publicly acknowledged me, but I was being asked to step back into a spotlight I had never asked for but had more than earned. It should have felt vindicating. It didn't. It felt temporary. Mark's words rang in my ears. Reintegrate with the client immediately. Sure. But reintegrate under what terms? No apology. No correction issued. No acknowledgement to the client that I had been intentionally sidelined. It was as though someone had just quietly hit undo on their attempt to erase me, and that didn't sit right with me. Still, I did as asked. That afternoon, I scheduled a meeting with the logistics client's CTO. Not the usual handlers from sales. Not Brad or his polished pitch partner, Jules. I went straight to the tech lead who actually understood what had been built. When the call connected, the CTO, Raj, looked surprised. Sarah? We weren't expecting you. I know, I said calmly. And I wasn't invited to the original deal presentation either. But I designed the platform you're investing $8 million into. I figured you deserved some technical transparency. Raj's smile was immediate, almost relieved. We had a feeling. Some of the answers we got last week didn't match what we'd reviewed earlier in the POC. Honestly, we started to think the architecture had changed. No, I said. It hasn't changed. But the storytellers did. I walked him through the system again, only this time, not the sales-polished version. I explained the microservices we'd built, the fallback logic for edge case logistics exceptions, and how we'd integrated their legacy APIs with custom middleware. At one point, Raj stopped me and said, "Wait, that routing logic, we flagged that as something we wanted from day one. No one mentioned it last week." I built it in January, I replied. You're using it already in the testbed. By the time we finished the call, Raj leaned back and said, "So, what exactly happened? Why weren't you part of the meeting?" I hesitated. Internal politics. Let's just say my name didn't make it into the story the execs decided to tell. Raj frowned. I'll be honest with you, Sarah. That doesn't sit well with us. Transparency was a huge part of why we chose Allerton. And your documentation gave us more confidence than the rest of the market combined. He ended the call by saying, "I'm going to bring this up with our procurement head. We need to know who we're really working with here." And that was the turning point I'd been waiting for. By re-establishing that direct line with the client, and showing not just competence but continuity, I had reopened a door Brad and his team thought they'd slammed shut. And they didn't like it. Within 48 hours, internal emails started flying. I wasn't copied on most, but the tension was obvious. Jules sent a message asking me to loop in marketing for any client touchpoints going forward. Brad tried to reassert himself by assigning me a last-minute QA checklist, as if to remind me that he still saw me as a subordinate. But the timing was off. Because just as they were scrambling to reframe the narrative, the board requested a special review of the enterprise licensing process. And this time, I wasn't just part of the background, I was the main speaker. Mark invited me personally. Sarah, walk them through what you built. The real deal. No fluff. When the Zoom opened that Friday, I saw 10 people on screen, board members, finance officers, legal observers. Brad was in the corner, camera off. Jules was nowhere to be seen. I began with my original roadmap. Then I pulled up architecture diagrams with timestamps. Version histories. Git commits. Comments on Jira tickets that linked code to client requests. I even had a heat map showing who contributed what, and when, to each major module of the platform. One board member leaned in. Just to clarify, this wasn't built by a team? Oh, there was a team, I answered. But every layer of the stack? I wrote the specifications. The integrations? I prototyped and deployed them. Even the API endpoints the client praised, those were coded by me, with testing support from a junior dev. Silence. Then, one of the senior board members asked, "So, how did your name not end up in the deal presentation?" I met his gaze. "I'm still trying to figure that out. But I have some theories." I didn't need to name names. The absence of Brad and Jules was already conspicuous. And my records did all the talking. For once, I didn't have to argue. I just had to show the truth and let it sting. After the presentation, Mark called me privately. "I don't know what to say," he began. "That was one of the most thorough technical walkthroughs I've seen since joining Allerton." "Thank you," I said cautiously. "You've been badly underleveraged," he continued. "That ends now. I want you to step up as principal architect for the enterprise line. You'll report directly to me." I almost didn't believe him. "What about Brad?" "We're reviewing his role," Mark said diplomatically. "For now, you're in charge." And just like that, the power shifted. I wasn't just back, I was elevated. But deep down, I knew chapter 2 of this climax was still coming. Brad wasn't going to take this lying down. And exposing the truth to the board was only half the war. Now, I had to prove that I could lead this product and protect it from the very people who tried to steal it from me. The Monday after I was unofficially promoted felt like the eye of a hurricane. Calm, but tense, because everyone sensed something was shifting. I walked into the office with a new badge title, a new seat near the executive suite, and direct access to the company's most sensitive technical data. But I also walked into a war zone. Brad hadn't been fired. Not yet. Instead, he was under review, which in Allerton's language meant he still had allies. And allies fight back, especially when they feel power slipping away. The first shot came in an all-hands product meeting. I had just finished presenting a proposed rollout schedule for the next phase of integration with the logistics client. It was clear, detailed, and aligned with every technical constraint we'd been given. But as soon as I stopped speaking, Brad unmuted. "Sarah," he said with forced politeness, "that's impressive, but I'm not sure it reflects the real timeline the client expects. Have you been in touch with procurement recently? They've raised concerns about feature delivery speed." I didn't flinch. "I spoke with Raj directly last Friday. He said the current timeline was both realistic and preferred." "Well," Brad said, smiling tightly, "Raj isn't the only voice at the table." "True," I replied, "but he's the one who controls the tech integration, and the one who asked for me by name." The virtual room went still. This wasn't a battle about delivery dates. It was a power play, an attempt to sow doubt about whether I really had the authority I'd just been given. Brad was testing me, publicly, in front of 50 senior stakeholders. Mark, to his credit, stepped in. "Brad, we'll stick with Sarah's timeline." The board was impressed with her detail and data orientation. "Let's not second-guess a strategy we've already aligned on." Brad nodded, his eyes tight. "Of course. Just trying to avoid surprises." "You mean the kind of surprise where your name disappears from the next org chart?" I thought. But that wasn't the end of it. 2 days later, I got a Slack message from a mid-level developer named Tim, someone I barely knew. He forwarded me an internal thread I hadn't been copied on, where Brad was clarifying that I had been working under his technical mentorship for the past year and that credit attribution on the logistics platform was still under discussion. I stared at the message for a full minute, jaw clenched. Mentorship? He hadn't looked at a single line of my code. The closest thing to mentoring Brad had ever done was take my roadmap and slap his name on the top. And now, post-review, he was trying to rewrite history. That night, I compiled a digital folder, commits, Slack messages, technical designs, internal emails, and even timestamped voice memos from late-night testing runs. I labeled it Ownership Documentation, Logistics Platform, Sarah Carter, and copied Mark, the VP of Engineering and Legal. I didn't ask for anything. I just let the facts speak. The next morning, Brad was called into HR. Later that week, his desk was empty. I thought it would feel like justice. Instead, it felt like debris. Because while Brad's exit cleared the field, it didn't erase the damage. Jules, his pitch partner, was still around, and she was better at playing the long game. Quiet, charming, always working the room while pretending she wasn't. I didn't trust her, and I had reason not to. She invited me to lunch to reset. I agreed, cautiously. Over sushi, she smiled like we were old friends. You know, Sarah, I always said you were the brains behind the operation. I'm glad leadership finally sees it. I raised an eyebrow. You never said that. In fact, you were in the room when Brad pushed me out of the deal meeting. You didn't say a word. Jules sighed. I didn't have the power to stop it. You had the power to speak. You chose not to. She leaned forward. Look. We're here now. You've got the title. I'm still leading external partnerships. We need to work together. On one condition, I said. Name it. You stop spinning. You stop maneuvering. You stop pretending you didn't help hide the one person who built what they were selling. Jules smiled, but her eyes cooled. I'm not your enemy, Sarah. I just know how this company works. That's exactly the problem. I paid for my own lunch. From then on, I kept my guard up. Not out of paranoia, but clarity. Just because I had the title now didn't mean I had lasting power. Titles shift. Cultures resist change. And egos bruise easily, especially when they lose to someone they once ignored. But I kept building. I redesigned our deployment pipeline to be faster and more secure. I mentored 2 junior engineers and handed them real ownership of key modules. I introduced a monthly cross-functional tech forum that encouraged open collaboration between devs and business leads. And I started logging everything, every win, every loss, every weird email. Because I knew the next wave would come. And it did. 2 months later, a new VP of product came in from a rival firm. Young, ambitious, very polished. Within 2 weeks, he questioned the current architecture. Why isn't this platform serverless? He asked in a meeting, clearly trying to assert dominance. I explained the reasons calmly: latency control, compliance, cost variability at scale. But I saw the look in his eyes. He didn't want technical answers, he wanted to challenge my turf. I sent him a comprehensive white paper I'd written 6 months ago, outlining all the trade-offs and our rationale. He never responded, but I heard through the grapevine he'd been told to back off. Mark had my back now. That moment crystallized something for me. Success wasn't just about surviving betrayals, it was about building systems strong enough to survive challenges, even after you're gone. That's what real architects do. Not just of code, but of culture. And I was doing both. The logistics client extended their contract to a 3-year partnership. The board formally recognized my contribution in their quarterly letter. And Raj? He emailed me saying, "Thanks for building something we can actually rely on." Rare in this market. But more than that, I had quietly, completely, taken back what was mine, and then raised the bar higher. The people who erased me? Gone. The ones who stayed? They knew better than to try again. After the dust had settled and my name was not only restored but elevated, there was a strange kind of stillness at work. Like the eye of a storm that had already swept through and left behind a landscape that looked similar, but was fundamentally changed. I was no longer just Sarah from DevOps. People now introduced me as the architect behind the $8 million logistics platform. Meetings that once passed me by now had my name at the top of the invite list. External partners copied me directly in emails. Internal teams who had once looped around me now asked for my input first. But with that visibility came something else, responsibility at an entirely different level. My first real test of leadership came just 2 weeks after Brad's final departure. The logistics client, now fully on board and scaling faster than anyone projected, encountered a failure in their real-time tracking module. A timeout issue had been cascading silently for over 48 hours and was only discovered after a shipment worth nearly $900,000 was misrouted due to stale data. Panic spread quickly. My team's initial diagnosis wasn't reassuring. The error wasn't in their code. It was embedded in a legacy wrapper built by a third-party contractor hired during the early rush to MVP. It had been duct-taped into the system and forgotten until now. In the old days, someone would have thrown blame down the hierarchy. Brad would have called an emergency meeting, barked accusations, and asked for a scapegoat. But I didn't believe in scapegoats. I believed in accountability, clarity, and swift, data-driven resolution. I called an all-hands dev meeting within the hour and told everyone plainly, "We're not here to assign blame. We're here to fix the problem, build safeguards so it doesn't happen again, and own the outcome together. Let's make this our best moment, not our worst." The energy shifted. Engineers who had been wary of speaking up under the old regime suddenly leaned in, suggested ideas, reviewed one another's code without ego. By midnight, we'd patched the faulty call chain, restructured the timeout behavior, and published a retroactive fix for all recent clients. The logistics firm emailed us the next morning, impressive turnaround. "We've never seen that kind of response before." And just like that, something I hadn't realized was missing returned: trust. My team started believing in me not just as a coder or architect, but as someone who would go to war for them, not against them. I didn't need to micromanage. I needed to clear their path, ask the right questions, and hold us all to a standard of excellence, starting with myself. Still, not everyone embraced the shift. A few middle managers who had benefited from the old top-down culture began quietly resisting the new tone. They complained about the pace of change, cited whiplash from new standards, and started holding sidebar meetings without looping me in. It was subtle, but deliberate. One of them, a guy named Nick who led procurement integrations, sent a proposal to legal without consulting engineering. The proposal included a clause allowing outside vendors to optimize technical flow using their proprietary systems. Translation? Handing our back-end keys to third-party code with zero transparency. I called him directly. "Nick, we don't hand over core pipeline access to vendors." "That's a non-starter." "It's just a draft," he said breezily. "You weren't on the review chain yet." I should have been the first name on it. A long pause. "Look, Sarah, I've been doing this for 12 years. Sometimes you have to let business take the lead." I stayed calm. "And sometimes the business loses millions when technical oversight is ignored. This clause doesn't go forward." Nick wasn't happy. He escalated to Mark. And for a moment, I worried. Not because I lacked the facts, but because I knew how subtle office politics worked. People like Nick used relationships, not data. But this time, something different happened. Mark forwarded me the chain with a short note: "Looks like you've already handled it perfectly. Let me know if he pushes back further." The shift wasn't just in perception. It was structural. The people at the top now backed merit. They backed facts. And they backed me. That week, Mark and I co-presented the next roadmap to the board. I handled the tech roadmap, he narrated the strategic overlay. Afterward, as we stepped out into the elevator, he said something that stuck with me. You know, when I first joined this company, I thought we had the right people in place. It took your fight to show me how much we were missing. I didn't know how to respond at first. Praise from Mark didn't come easily. But I nodded. I wasn't trying to fight, I said finally. I was just trying to be seen. He smiled. You are now. The weeks that followed the board meeting felt like I had crossed into a new dimension of my career. Not because I was showered in praise or handed some title, those things didn't matter as much to me as clarity, autonomy, and respect. And I finally had all three. Still, even in victory, I found myself haunted by what almost happened. How close I came to being written out of the narrative. All it had taken was one meeting, an invitation I never received, and suddenly, years of hard-earned credibility were on the verge of being wiped away. If not for that one moment, that one pause, that one CEO who dared to ask the room, "Where's the real architect?" I might have vanished beneath the radar forever. So I made a decision: no one else on my team would ever be invisible again. I began what I called visibility rounds. Every Friday afternoon, I'd sit down with a different team, from infrastructure to QA to UI, and ask them directly what they were working on, what challenges they faced, and what they were most proud of that week. It started informally, with a few curious glances. But soon, it became something people looked forward to. People brought diagrams, code snippets, even rough prototypes. And I made sure their work got credit. In every leadership meeting, I referenced them by name, not just team. This stability fix came from Melina in QA. She traced a rare edge case none of us caught. Devin and Sam in data science streamlined the prediction model, cut load times by 28%. Slowly, the culture began to bend. Not dramatically, not overnight, but enough that junior engineers began to speak with more confidence. Managers started asking how they could amplify their teams more effectively. And more importantly, there was less fear. Fewer CYA emails. Fewer moments where people hesitated to admit mistakes. Because they saw me own mine. Publicly. One moment that made it real came during a sprint review, when a bug report was miscategorized and sent to the wrong team. Instead of finger-pointing, I saw two leads, neither of whom had been responsible, step up and say, "We'll take this, let's fix it together." That was new. That was culture change. But as I poured myself into building a healthier ecosystem internally, external recognition also began knocking on the door. The logistics firm, the same $8 million client whose deal I'd nearly been excluded from, invited me to speak at their annual supply chain conference. They wanted me to share how our platform had helped them reduce fulfillment lag by 31% and how architecture decisions had influenced long-term scalability. It was my first major speaking engagement, and I'll admit, I was nervous. But I said yes. I spent 2 weeks prepping, not just slides, but stories. Real ones. About how architectural decisions weren't just diagrams or dependencies, they were human decisions. Decisions about trust, timing, load, risk, and communication. The day of the conference, I stood in front of 600 supply chain leaders and told them the truth. When I wasn't invited to the deal meeting, I realized something. We talk about visibility in systems all the time, but we don't talk about visibility for the people who build them. This platform didn't just succeed because of code. It succeeded because people were finally seen and allowed to do their best work. The room went still. Then the applause came. After the talk, a dozen executives from other companies approached me. Some offered contracts. Others asked to license our architecture playbook. One said something I'll never forget. "You're not just building systems. You're changing how teams see each other." Back home, word got around fast. Mark sent me a one-line email. "Now the whole industry knows what I almost missed." And then came the offer. A promotion, not just in title, but in influence. Chief Technical Strategist. A new hybrid role that would allow me to both lead our architectural direction and ensure technical voices were heard across every major product decision. It wasn't just recognition. It was permission. Permission to build the kind of organization I'd always wanted to work in. One where merit mattered more than noise. One where the best idea could come from anywhere and be recognized without politics. I accepted. But not before I made one condition: no architect, no senior dev, no team lead would ever again be excluded from key deal meetings involving their work. Mark agreed instantly. "You've earned that, and more," he said. It could have ended there. It could have just been a feel-good arc of redemption and progress. But the truth is, change is never that clean. Just a few months later, we hit another test. A startup we had quietly acquired for their AI shipping model had misrepresented parts of their codebase. Integration teams found shortcuts, copy-pasted modules from open-source tools without proper licensing. Legal raised red flags. Our timeline was at risk. Fingers pointed. Some wanted to pull out of the acquisition entirely. Others wanted to hide it, patch over the mess quietly, and hope no one noticed. That's when people turned to me. And I said no. We don't bury problems here. We fix them. And we show our work. It was the same philosophy I'd been pushing all along. I assembled a cross-functional task force. We rewrote the questionable code, validated every component, refiled the licensing disclosures, and issued a statement to all stakeholders about what had been found and how it was fixed. The fallout? Minimal. Why? Because we owned it. Because transparency, once a liability, had become our brand. And the reward? The next quarter, our client retention rate hit a record high. Trust wasn't just earned, it became our competitive edge. And I finally understood, being excluded from that $8 million deal meeting wasn't just a professional slight. It was the catalyst for something far bigger. It lit a fire not just in me, but in the culture we built afterward. A culture where the real architects would never be invisible again. In the end, not being invited to that meeting became one of the most important moments of my career, not because of the pain it caused, but because of the clarity it brought. It showed me that systems aren't just made of code, diagrams, or metrics. They're made of people. And when people are overlooked, the whole structure becomes fragile, no matter how brilliant the architecture appears on paper. For years, I thought keeping my head down and letting the work speak for itself would be enough. That excellence alone would earn visibility. But I learned the hard way: silence is misinterpreted. Absence is reinterpreted. And if you don't step forward, someone else will write the story for you, and possibly erase you from it. What saved me wasn't just the proof I had or the CEO's timely question. It was the decision to stop operating quietly. To claim space. To speak up, not just for myself, but for others who, like me, were doing extraordinary work behind the scenes with no recognition. I realized that technical mastery means nothing if it's buried under layers of politics and gatekeeping. But I also learned that change is possible. Today, I walk into every room as a voice, not a shadow. I build systems with transparency not just in data flow, but in how we collaborate. I mentor engineers on code quality, yes, but also on communication, leadership, and advocacy. Because the next time $1 million decision is made, I don't want anyone asking, "Where's the real architect?" I want them to already know. And more importantly, I want that architect.